Friends, welcome back. After that, it should be the warm-up session, the documentations. To touch upon this subject, we have got two eminent personalities, the lawyers, who are well known in this market of fundraising, right? So I would request CA Kiran Kumar to escort Shri Venkat Satyanarayana and also Apurva Manvits to the desk, please. And also welcome with the flower. One more. Thank you, Kiran Kumar. Friends, Sri Venkat Satyanarayana is a very good friend of mine. I have been working with him. Good experience of dealing with him. A couple of transactions I was involved and a lot of learning in terms of the deal documentations and the deal structuring aspects. It was my part of the experience with him. He has got a rich experience of more than 24 years in this field. Currently, he is the senior partner in Link Legal India Law Services. He has completed his BSc in Mathematics from Delhi University, and he is also a qualified company secretary from ICSI. He is a law graduate from Bangalore University, and currently is the member of Karnataka High Court Bar Association. He is having rich experience in the area of corporate fundraising, M&A, and also the areas of expertise are in anti-corruption, employment regulations, and exchange control, M&A, private equity, and many more, of course. So, with his consent, I would like to make the introduction very brief. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me to welcome him once again. Apurva Malik is a senior associate partner in Link Legal. He has got more than 10 years of experience in private equity and M&A, and also into general corporate and real estate related regulatory services. He worked earlier in Amarchand Mangalas and also Fox Mandal, and his expertise is in the area of infrastructure, capital market, IT-enabled services, pharma, and other varied sectors. He is basically the law graduate from West Bengal and LLM from Nasir, Hyderabad. I am sure both the eminent speakers on the stage are going to give you a lot of information which is going to be useful in your practice as well. Ladies and gentlemen, join me to welcome both of them once again.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Institute of Chartered Accountants and Chevron especially for giving me an opportunity for me and my team to be in front of you and speak whatever little knowledge that we've gained of this vast subject that we encounter on a day-to-day basis. Eminence, I don't know whether we are eminent or not. Just the eminence concept comes from all the mistakes that we do in deal structuring and deal transactions, and that's what perhaps is called experience. So experience is a function of mistakes, and we've committed a lot of them. So that's something I wanted to be on the lighter side of it. But I just like to add to what Vedant Agrawal was speaking about the previous session with respect to the precautions that a promoter ought to be taking. Is it okay? Is everybody here? So the precautions the promoter ought to be taking, it was quite an extensive presentation, perhaps overlapping with ours. But a couple of things, softest things that I would like to propose for we fight for clients who are culpable as culpable as one can get in litigation and in corporate action. So one of the things that I have noticed, before I of course go ahead, I'd just like to tell you about the law firm that we work with. We are actually a national law firm with about 7 places spread across the 7 places in the country. We have about 31 partners, about 150 lawyers across those places. I hold the responsibility of handling the South India, and therefore responsible for Hyderabad, Bangalore, and Chennai. We of course have a lot of, our base being Delhi, we have a lot of people over there, and the Bombay has just been set up in the past 1.5 to 2 years with an acquisition that we as ourselves had. And we are spread around in broadly 5 verticals and major verticals, which is infrastructure. There is a second vertical of corporate commercial, which is what we are all about today. The third vertical is banking and NCLT practice, which is today a rip-roaring practice. And finally, the disputes resolution, which is again arbitrations and other civil court matters and high court matters. So in these 4 verticals, we are spread across all these 7 states, 6 states or 6 places, and we are doing okay. We are doing okay, to be honest with you. Now coming back to, I leave the technical presentation to my colleague, which will start off from this slide. I think he's more competent than me, given the fact that I've been all over the place in my so-called senior partnership. But just coming back to what Devendra mentioned, the precautions the promoter need to be taking are slightly just before he gets on to the board of dealing with the investors in the term sheet. One of the things that I realized in my experience in the Indian system that I'm talking about, and I fortunately had an experience in dealing with Western countries, SHAs and SSPAs because of common law perspective, dealing with the lawyers and the advisors over there as well as the companies. I've had a good opportunity to deal with them. And I could see a fundamental difference between the promoters there and here. And number one, I could also see a fundamental difference of the investors there and here. Is it screechy?
Yeah. That's more audible than yours.
Okay, that should be. Okay. So one of the things that I saw, I think it's disturbing there. Okay, I'll just. One of the things, can you hear me at the back?
Yes.
So one of the things that I saw in the fundamental difference in Indian promoter in let's say Silicon Valley, I'm talking about Bangalore and Silicon Valley so to speak, very limited extent of knowledge that I have and experience, the fact that the promoter is comprehensively prepared. The comprehensively preparedness comes from the fact that he comes from a particular industry, gets onto his own, I'm talking about Western countries where I've dealt with a few matters, and he is prepared with a complete industry analysis and a sectoral analysis and a business plan, and then he also identifies the investors who are akin to his business plan, akin to his industry sector. Right? So if there's a pharma guy or an IT guy or IT personality or AI, in these days artificial intelligence is the flavor of the season, and I'm telling you cyber security is the next one. So if you see these kind of hard-nosed technology companies, you will find the promoter has spent about 10, 15, 20 years in this sector, number one. He would have analyzed the sector for the next 20 years or 15 years in the foreseeable future. He will also formulate a business plan for himself, and then he will start identifying his own resources, how much money has he got, what is the function of the business plan in terms of the fund raise, as well as his own resources, and then go to those investors who are actually akin or aligned to his sector basically. As opposed to an Indian promoter and an Indian system wherein, for instance, when it's one of the rare cases, and I take the liberty from Shivram to mention this, the previous organization that he was working in is a very high-tech based organization. And trust me, there was only 2 or 3 investors, as I would remember from the conversation that I had with the promoter and Shivram in the past, only maybe about half a dozen investors, if not 2, 3, who had the ability to understand what they were speaking. They were in the semiconductor industry. And semiconductor industry as a sector is not exactly booming. They are all services sectors, right? It's a product-based company. And a product-based company in India, in Bangalore, was not, I'm talking about maybe close to 10 years back now, 8-9 years back, was not exactly recognized as we now do in artificial intelligence space. And we've taken nascent steps towards it. So the investor that they were able to identify were very few and far in between, and the follow-on investment from the same investor or some other investor, they had a tough time to raise finance. Really tough time to raise finance. For the simple reason, they were not able to find investors who were aligned to their business, who were aligned and who could understand the concepts of the technology aspects of their business, basically. I've seen the other spectrum also. Now come to the promoters, the Indian promoters. Now these promoters who are, in these times, they are fairly young promoters, at least relative to what we see. Youngsters today at 21, 15. The Bangalore as an ecosystem has given a lot of opportunities to youngsters to live their dream. By living their dream, what happens is, one thing that I've noticed in young promoters, I've seen promoters at 21, I've seen promoters at 35, and I've seen promoters beyond that as well. For the youngsters, they get into it, and it also happens in majority of the cases. They get into it, but they don't have a business plan. They don't do an industry analysis. They don't identify the sectoral investors, and they just go all over. They have some kind of a basic structure. They go all over the place. They don't have good advisors to go with. They are sensitive on cost, which is a fair thing to do. Okay, but when they reach the investors, they are actually playing straight into the hands of the investors. Straight into the hands of the investors. I've seen a case. I can't name the client, wherein I'll talk about the promoters, investors in a few minutes. Wherein this company, about 4 promoters based out of Bangalore, were intending to raise an angel investment of about 2-3 crores. Okay. Now they didn't have a business plan, a very sketchy business plan. They didn't have a vision of industry analysis, how the industry is going to play out. And that particular industry in which they were in was dependent upon some other industry. So if that some other industry falls down, how will it play out on the dependent industry? That analysis did not happen at all. And when they went, they had no clue what they were going to be negotiating in terms of the business, in terms of the legalities, in terms of the finances. And they played straight into the hands of the investor, and unfortunately the company has not done well, and it's shut down now. These are the things that I see when I compare the promoters, Indian promoters, and the promoters from more mature promoters from the West. Likewise for the investors as well. Now you see investors who are from very good colleges, schools, well educated, but something like artificial intelligence, which is an absolute, or semiconductor industry for that matter, or even a cyber security, which is absolutely technical subject. Do you have investors who know the sector, who will understand the lingo that you speak, who will understand the industry analysis that you present, who will probably ask you the right questions, because that's what makes a business plan develop and industry analysis develop? The answer, I don't think, with due respect to the investor community, I don't find an answer there. The answer is no. Very few of them. Very, very few of them. Therefore, what happens is, when you make a presentation, it becomes an Excel sheet presentation. I go there as an investor. I go there as an Indian promoter and make a presentation to general investors who don't know my sectors as such, and it becomes an sector. For instance, I'll take a very hard brick and mortar sector, like power sector, like infrastructure sector, or like, let's say, environment sector, not ITS. We're talking about in general sense, right? There are quite a few startups. Clean tech is a big startup sector today in Hyderabad. Okay, I travel fairly extensively to Hyderabad, and waste management services today, you have a lot of big companies, but there are a lot of small companies which are also into that space. But who are the investors at that level of the angel investment or Series A investment? None. None at all. You have the big boys, really big boys, who will not invest, let's say 2 crores, 3 crores, they'll invest only 10,000 crores or 5,000 crores, which has happened in the recent past. So that's the ecosystem that we live into, and India, to be honest with you, the way I look at it, India has to mature to that extent. The other thing that I found out was that these promoters, obviously, they're very, very cost conscious, and it ought to be, because it's hard-earned money which is going into establishing the system. They don't go to the right advisors. Okay. I believe that right advisors, as Devendra was mentioning, should be the investment bankers and the chartered accountants start off with respect to the business plan, the industry sector analysis. If that's clear, then the lawyers come in terms of the legal regulations and etc., compliance issues. They don't go to the right persons, and that's where they get stuck. So one of the things that I found out was on the maturity levels of advisors, also that we need to be very, very sensitive to the fact that we have to invest on time. As professionals, we have to invest on time with these sectors, with these investors, with these promoters, Indian promoters. And when they start doing well, that's where we need to probably start encashing our efforts. So there has to be a model amongst ourselves to advise in terms of knowledge, in terms of business plan, ourselves in a professional way to support the system that the startup system is crying for. And there's a lot of opportunities there. So that's where I just want to add that to what the promoter's precaution when he goes into the fundraise mode. As a sector, we are right now, I'll just take you to the presentation, the other presentation I have. Where is it? Sorry. This is just a statistical analysis. I leave the technical competence to technical aspect to Musa. If you see that today, in 2018, we have a huge explosion of investment in the startup phase, especially in Bangalore, Chennai and Hyderabad, and to an extent Gurgaon. That's been our experience. Of course, more than happy to get an experience from your side as well. Of course, Bangalore dominates the startup ecosystem. It's a very mature startup system in the Indian context. Lovely promoters, good investors, and good advisors. There's a lot of talent over here. So today you see from a statistical analysis, we are doing repro business with VC investments. And we as a law firm, we have a very, very robust practice in Delhi, Mumbai and Bangalore. We are the beneficiaries from this, so to speak. As of September as well, there's been, in fact in September we did about, as a law firm, we did about 18 deals in straight 30 days. Now it's becoming like a factory, I know, but that's what it becomes. So that's something, the documentation aspect of it will be told by Apurva. If you see the trends, we are picking it up. I'm sure this is a very lighter one, we are picking it up. But the sectors that are reproing today, which is one of the sectors that is not covered, is, I'll tell you about it, this is my analysis. Financial sector, real estate sector is down, but financial services sector is going up. But fintech sector has got a problem today, and the problem is of data localization. RBI, I'm sure you would all know, RBI has come out with saying to all the fintech sectors, saying that whatever data you have today of yours and mine has to be localized in India as opposed to sitting somewhere in European countries or South Africa or wherever it is. So that the deadline was 15th October, and the companies are struggling to get that entire my details into the Indian country and localize it over here. That's the challenge they are facing now. And the investors, this is a 2017 chart, but in 2018, this regulation came up, this notification came up by RBI in February of this year. And ever since that, the fintech sector has been facing issues. Because data localization is not easy. Your cloud is sitting somewhere else in US or European country. You need to get that data, name, address, PAN card, everything into this area. And that's not easy. It requires a lot of investment, so to speak. But with the investment, there's an opportunity for the fintech sector also. I do know of a company, unfortunately couldn't get invested, which is in the cloud space. Now, a Bangalore-based company, a startup company, has now got an opportunity to do data localization opportunity by virtue of the notification it's got. So from a business perspective, this sector is going to boom big time. But real estate sector, I think it's been on downward trend to an extent because of RERA. You know what RERA is all about, so I don't have to get into that. And we get a lot of, at least since I practice a bit of real estate law, I get a lot of queries on RERA. A lot of queries on RERA. How some of the real estate companies are not even registered, and how to go about it. That's where the real estate sector has gone down, because there's a regulation that's happening, and this regulation is going to be there in other sectors as well. So people, businessmen should be prepared for this. So this sector is getting regulated through RERA, and so it's a very positive step. But it's taking its time. There's a dip on the market in 2018 at least, as I know. But it will mature, because everything has to go through a process. And I called upon an example of SEBI. When it came up with SEBI of 1992, it started to clean up the markets, and today SEBI is one of the most mature regulator that I have personally known. CAT, Competition Appellate Tribunal, Competition Commission, as well as SAT are very mature tribunals, so to speak, especially SEBI. E-commerce, we all know we don't have it. Technology is something that needs to go up. Technology again is on AI basis. We are right now doing deals of 6 out of 18, 6 were AI. Okay, so that sector is an evolutionary sector, the way it's going. Cloud-based, artificial technology, artificial intelligence, and cyber security technology. These are the 3 sectors that I can think about in technology, which is picking up big time. It's very nascent stage, but trust me, it will pick up very big time. And I'll also tell you, we as lawyers, in terms of corporate law, are in danger to losing our business to AI. And it's been news. I mean, it's been tested in South Africa. I think it's in South Africa, where the documentation aspect of it, of SSA, SHM, which Apurva is going to be speaking, next presentation in the Institute of Chartered Accountants of India would probably be an artificial intelligence standing there. So that analysis is actually going into it. And one of the companies in India, it was in the newspapers, I forget the name, I think Infosys or something, has actually tried to do this under the previous dispensation of the management. Try to do this try to invest a lot in artificial intelligence to streamline the systems for the lawyers. What are the sectors, the booming sector for the lawyers community? I mean, these are all the deals that, in terms of values, e-commerce still stands because of Flipkart issue. Flipkart issue. In terms of volumes, technology remains big. There's no doubt about that, and it will continue to be big. In terms of values, technology remains low for the simple reason we have startup phases, we have SaaS, we have product companies, we have newer technologies coming up. So in terms of values, it will always be less because they take from 10 lakhs to 10,000 crores. But in terms of volumes, technology in Bangalore would be a dominant feature. The biggest PE firms in India, which we've actually not listed out some of the VC funds that you are all aware of, like Kalari Capital and Axel Capital and all that, Axel Ventures. But these are the biggest PE funds, which incidentally, very interestingly, since we have gone in a bit of this space, someone like KKR or Blackstone, which is some of the biggest funds in the world, have started getting down to when they see an opportunity at the startup level. For instance, KKR is a public news, so I can talk about it. KKR is a buyout fund. It's a New York-based listed company fund. Likewise, Blackstone. KKR has actually invested in an environmental space company for $100,000. That's all. Whereas we did a deal with KKR recently, and they're intending to invest about 3,500 crores in this particular company that I'm speaking about. So even the big boys of the globe are looking at the angel investments when there's an opportunity. And the opportunity today is obviously IT, which is what the sector is all about. E-commerce, I always take it with a pinch of salt because I don't know where the numbers are coming from. You would know better. But my view in terms of sector, you will have a lot of opportunities in infra, environment, and technology, surely. Because infra, you know where we are. Bangalore is the best example. Environment, where all of you know where we are, and technology, you know where we are. So these are 3 sectors I can clearly think of from my perspective of little experience that I have, which will be the next wave, so to speak. I mean that broadly, the challenges faced by the investors across all especially in the angel and PE, one of the biggest challenges which you are more adept at speaking is tax. Nobody has a clue of what tax is all about, at least of me. The moment IT department sends me an SMS, I just forward to my chartered accountant saying that I don't know what this is all about, sort it out. Okay, fortunately I have received no notice. But tax is the biggest challenge that I see in terms of the angel investment, PE, VC investments. So opportunity for all of you to scale up, and the one way that I've realized is I've dealt with a lot of chartered accountants in my time, with the reasonable experience that I have. But I've seen that it's just not just Big Four. I mean, I've seen a very competent chartered accountants advising us in a documentation phase on the tax aspect of it. Whether it's an SPA, SSA, some structuring happens of the transaction. Okay, so it's a big opportunity for all of you, and I leave it to your better judgment, of course. The new thing that's come up today is bankruptcy. Now, this is a big M&A opportunity for all of you. I mean, I don't know how it. My view, we've done one. Personally, we've done one. I've advised a client from a seller's perspective. This company was in bankruptcy, and there was a company which wanted to take over this company. They went through the process of committee of creditors. So that's a big area. I don't know how it helps you out in terms of tax and other advisory services that all of you render as professionals. But this is a big area today, the upcoming area. But this law is an evolving law. Even today as we speak, incidentally there are two examples that I can quote why it is an evolving law. One, if you pick up the newspaper, you will see Tata Steel is trying to take over Bhushan Steel. Bhushan Steel owes lenders about 40,000 crores. Okay? And Tata Steel is trying to take over that. Tata Steel has been frozen as an acquirer to take over the Bhushan Steel and pay the creditors. Suddenly out of the blue, the other competitor, I think it's JSW, it's a public news so I can speak about it, JSW, has made a counter offer. Much later in the stage, when the committee of creditors lenders sit and say, okay, we'll appoint Tata Steel as an acquirer, and then JSW makes a counter offer, then it's all the hell is broken loose, to be honest with you, and pardon my language for that. All the hell is broken loose. Because once the committee of creditors made an offer and accepted by Tata Steel, what is the locus standi for the COC to go to another, merely because someone else has upped the offer to JSW and entertain the counter offer? Now this matter is now going in Supreme Court. So that's one instance. Second instance is a very interesting instance of SR Steel. I'm sure all of you will be reading the headlines, right? 54,000 crores owed by SR to the creditors, and there are quite a few bidders for the project for this company. And you have ArcelorMittal, Vedanta bidding for it. Out of the blue, when ArcelorMittal is almost getting the SR Steel makes an offer much later, probably 1.5 years later, saying that I will pay 100% to the entire amount to the creditors. What's the locus standi for the SR Steel promoters who have been declared as willful defaulters by the Reserve Bank of India in February of 2017 to make counter offer that I will pay everybody? And where is the money coming from at this late stage? So, human mind is very, very ingenious, and these are two examples of how ingenious we are in terms of crooked ingenious, to be honest with you. Right? It's just, in my personal opinion, it's just abuse of the process. Everything is landing up in the Supreme Court. Everything is landing up in the Supreme Court. In fact, even the Limitation Act, the Supreme Court came out with a judgment on IBC, clearing up the air. So this law is one of the biggest challenges in a somewhat larger deals, not an angel investment or PE funds deals, but all these PE funds like Mayas. Mayas is a prime example wherein it's again a common example. Mayas have fought with the investors. They want to NCLT. Now the company has been shut down. One of the most promising companies making fantastic profitability and turnover has now come down to a stage where its NCLT are probably going to go down also. I don't know. Due respect, I don't know where it's landing up. So this law is one of the challenges because it's an evolution law and it's creating a lot of havoc in PE investments as well as M&A transactions. In fact, one of the major funds in the world, Blackstone itself, is getting into bankruptcy laws in terms of trying to pick up the assets. So may not be relevant from a PE/VC circle, but from a larger perspective, this is one of the major challenges that they're facing. Of course, competition from the other things, of course, is the IRR thing. I beg to disagree. We as a firm beg to disagree with the submissions made by Devendra on the IRR issue, especially for a foreign investor. It's frowned upon by the RBI. It's come out with a clear-cut guideline saying that IRR will not be entertained for a foreign investor that I'm talking about, not a domestic investor. So if your client is actually covenanting in a document that I will pay you 18%, 24%, and 12% IRR, you ask your client to sign off. Because it's not according to the law, therefore unenforceable. Now the famous example of IRR controversy is again GMR arbitration, which went into Singapore with the investors. It is again a common news, right? There was a bit of, in 2010, they had covenanted the company had covenanted to the investors that they will pay about X percentage of IRR. I can't get into specifics because of other confidentiality reasons, but they said we'll pay you X percent of IRR. By that time, that was allowed in 2010 or 9 when the document was signed. But the RBI came up with this circular saying that no IRR. It has to be as per the current valuation and current profitability, etc. Right? It went into arbitration because the investors who had invested something like about 1800 crores or something, if I remember correctly. The investors who had invested that amount were expecting something in the vicinity of 18, 20, 25% IRR. They suddenly left in the lurch, and that particular sector in airports was not doing too well at that point of time also. Went into arbitration, came back, and they've now settled it. In fact, we made representations to Reserve Bank of India saying that why don't you exempt us from this particular notification and let me give my investor the IRR, because he is not allowing me to go forward in my business. Okay. But obviously RBI will not do it. But we made our efforts, we tried in every way that we could, but it fell flat, honestly. Eventually it had to be settled, and good for all of us. So I beg to disagree with Devendra when he made that IRR for foreign investors is frowned upon by is actually frowned upon by the regulatory community, and it would not be applicable at all. So if your investor is saying, the investor council says IRR of 18%, accept it, move on. Let's have fun at I'll have fun at the lawyer stage when it comes to dispute. Okay. These are broad topics that I have to be speaking about. I think I'll hand over the charge to Apurva, who will talk you through the technical aspects of it. More than happy to take the questions. We'll request Apurva to maintain the time, as I've already taken 20-25 minutes of the time. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah, thank you everybody. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to present the deal documentation and the structuring perspective. So, coming to the first point, which majorly is looked upon by the government and government from the two regulatory authorities, is the control perspective. Now, whenever there is an investment that is happening, be it a foreign or be it an Indian domestic investment. Please. So, whether it is a foreign investment or be it a domestic investment, control perspective has been looked into by the regulatory authorities, by SEBI as well as from the competition regulators. Now, coming to this point, there are two aspects to it. One is SEBI looks the control perspective from a different angle, as well as the competition authorities look at from a different angle. There have been several instances wherein SEBI has come up with saying that the affirmative rights, which Venkat sir as well as in the earlier presentation the gentleman has particularly stated. So affirmative rights actually is a kind of control, or it's a kind of a negative control, which SAT as well as the judicial precedents particularly say from a SEBI perspective. SEBI has always come up. So initially SEBI in Rodhia case has stated that the affirmative control is a control, but later on in subsequent various judgments, the latest one is like the Subcan case as well as the Clearwater Capital case, It's very clearly laid down that affirmative control is not a control as such, but it's a negative control which actually puts a kind of checks and balances so that the investor actually has a little bit of checks over the operations of the functionings of the company, as well as to see whether the investment of the funds that have been put in has been adequately utilized or not, and whether his interest is actually protected or not. But simultaneously looking from the other angle, if I go to the competition authorities' judgments, just like in Jet India or in some other cases, they have come up with a concept like saying that affirmative votes or this kind of language whenever we put in the document is a kind of control. So there have been several issues in Jet India case also that the competition authorities came out and said that it is a kind of control, but later on they gave the approval only on the aspect saying that it does not have an appreciable adverse effect. But if I look only from the control perspective, two authorities actually have a different view on it. So that actually is not yet settled and it's still open. We don't know whether at a later point of time FEMA or the foreign exchange authorities might also come up or might change the definition of a control at a later point of time and say that affirmative votes might at a later point of time come out. So it's a bit of challenge right now.
I would request all of you to have an interactive session because I think we are running a bit of a short of time. So on a control or something, if you have any questions, please jump in. More than happy to. It's a quality of debate that we would prefer rather than just one way street of a monologue. Thank you.
So when you say affirmative control, what is it practically translated?
Okay, so generally what happens, let me just give you a little bit of background. Like when we do the documentation, first I'll just go to this slide, so I mean it will be better. Okay, so when we start with the documentation perspective, be it like whether we represent the investor or we represent the promoters, first it starts with the term sheet. Okay, so term sheet actually gives a broad commercial understanding that they have, and just when I'm just dealing with the term sheet, I think in the earlier presentation some gentleman actually has asked the question like whether while I am actually dealing with an investor right now, can during the term sheet stage I can go and speak with other investors or not. So the term sheet gets drafted in such a way, sir, to be honest, there is a clause in, I mean I have not seen any term sheet excluding that particular clause which specifically says about the exclusivity clause. So they generally, whenever the term sheet is drafted, it's drafted in such a way that a 60 days time frame or maybe a 70, a time span is actually taken into consideration based on the due diligence time span that will be required. So during that phase, the promoter or the company directly or indirectly in whatever manner, they actually are restricted from discussing or disclosing these transactions or discussing with any other investor from for infusing any funds in the company. So there the restriction actually plays. So you are actually restricted during that time frame to speak with any other investor. Okay, so coming to the documentation perspective as well as from the affirmative, the question that has been raised is nothing but a veto right. So when an investor comes in or infuses capital or funds in be it equity or CCD or CCPS or any hybrid instrument, whatever the securities are. So to protect that his interest, there are certain rights which are actually incorporated in the document. Generally, it's we put in a schedule. Like for example, without prior consent of the investor, you cannot amend the MOA or the AOA of the company. Without my consent, you cannot change the auditors of the company. You cannot borrow or take any financial indebtedness. So here, generally when the draft comes from the investors, these clauses are there. Right? They are vast. It goes on like 20-30 points, honestly. Okay, so the way to dilute is like, for example, they will say like you cannot enter into any financial indebtedness, right? So here you can put a cap or maybe a kind of that beyond a threshold, right? For example, your company needs funds on a day-to-day basis, right? You may say like, okay, fine, it's not possible every time and then. Like for example, if I'm raising 10 crores from a financial lender, it's not necessary that I have to go, because 10 crores today in a big industrial sector is nothing, honestly, for a capital intensive company. So from that we have to understand like what can be like on an ordinary day-to-day basis, how much money that can be required. So you put a kind of threshold, like beyond that amount if I go, I'll go and take your consent, but not after that. So I mean, these are like rights which are given to the investor to actually have rights given to the investor, like to have a little bit of checks, so that the promoters doesn't go haywire, like they cannot do anything on their own without taking a prior consent. So this is a kind of a control, obviously, but the courts have actually said these are negative controls. Right? It's like you have to take my consent. It's not that you can do whatever you want, but these things, these are reserved matters. So together with that, this clause is connected with the board as well as with the quorum. So what happens is,
right, just come in.
Yeah.
Just to answer your question, just to add to what Apurva is saying, is that in a reserved matters concept or affirmative vote, AVM matters, fundamentally it's divided into two parts. Okay, legal, regulatory, and operational. Our focus need not necessarily be legal, regulatory. You have to look up the language because typically, as Apurva says, the memorandum of association should not be altered. That's a legal issue. I mean, you cannot alter the business side of it when he's already invested in a particular business. So that's a legal issue. We should be very, very sensitive as promoters to have a clause on the operational side of the affirmative votes, because that interferes on a day-to-day basis. Fundamentally, I've seen both sides of it. One is a side wherein the company has gone ahead and breached the fund of AVMs completely, without taking a consent at all, and the investor has gone silent. The other side is when it has breached, investor has cried foul, and there has been a dispute-oriented clauses that has got activated. The third part is when there is an actually vanilla thing. So you should always divide the AVMs into two parts. Now, when you review an AVM, review it from a legal regulatory perspective and the operational perspective. For instance, in an environmental-based company or an infrastructure, capital-intensive-based company, some license would not have got obtained. Pollution Control Board or shops and commercial establishment, whatever it is. So that's legal. But when as Apurva says, financial indebtedness, when a company has to borrow money from ex-investors or ex-bankers, what is the threshold of it? That is operational. So you should be sensitive to the operational issues of the AVMs more than the legal issues. Because legal issues emanate from protective as well as diligence rights. Diligence findings, sorry.
Sure. So another aspect is like once the term sheet gets drafted, we then start the diligence process. Like from the financial or the tax angle, obviously the chartered accountants are they do it. From the legal angle, we do it. And before starting that or during the diligence process, the main focus is whether the filings have been properly done or not, whether there is a requirement of a consent that is required from any lenders, because most of the lender documents, they particularly say that if you issue shares or if there is any change of control. So again, the control aspect comes a little bit of play here. So even for issuance of shares or transfer of shares or any kind of merger, amalgamation, corporate restructuring, you need to take the consent. There is an issue that is going on currently in one of our transactions where the consent requirement is required, but basically it's getting stuck. So all these things are to be pre-planned at the time of term sheet stage only, or maybe subsequent to the term sheet stage only, that what are the pre-closing activities, because these will always come at a CP in a document. So once we complete the diligence, we pull out all the issues that are required to be completed prior to the closing or prior to the funds coming in from the investors. So then it gets, those issues gets highlighted in the document as such as a conditions precedent or a condition subsequent. Right? That depends upon the parties, like to take a commercial call, like which without compliance with that also they can go and fund the investment. So if this can be deferred with a little bit of time span, then we can agree to it as a conditions subsequent. So there are two kinds of documents that are entered into when if it is a issuance of shares, we do a share subscription and a shareholders agreement, or together with that we get into one document which is an investment agreement as such. But if it is a share purchase, we do a share purchase with a shareholders agreement. There is a catch right now. Here is like all the terms, whatever we put, all the rights of the investors that gets incorporated in the shareholders documents, those are supposed or those are required to be adequately reflected in the articles of association of the company to give the force of enforceability. If it is not, then it's questionable. So it does not bind the company as such. Now, in 2013, Section 58 actually, it was not earlier in 1956 Act, but recently in 2013, there is a clause that actually got incorporated in case of transferability. So during 1956 Act, we used to take a stand that in documents one of the clause says about transferability of shares. Right? So in case, so what happens is if the investor has a strong negotiation power at that point of time during negotiation and finalization of the document, what happens is the investor says that I will be able to transfer my shares without taking your consent, but the promoters will not be able to transfer the shares without my consent. So now, if that clause is not getting reflected in the articles of association, it does not bind the company as such. But now in 2013 Act, this transferability, even if it is not incorporated in the articles of association, but it's only in the document as such, then also it's enforceable. This is the view that we as a firm has taken. And I think it's clearly, explicitly stated in the section as well. Now coming to the documentation stage. So this is the due diligence process, like data room is prepared, due diligence is done, we find out all the issues, then discuss, structure the documentation, whether it is a CP or whether it is CS, then documents are drafted, negotiation happens, and the closing items are done.
I just added, sorry to interrupt. I think we should advise our clients as follows, especially the startup and PEVC stage companies. We've advised them that one, as I said and I repeat, that they should have a good advisors, number one to start off with, who can actually do their business plan and industry analysis and make a good presentation to the investor. But before the angel investment or PVC investments happen, we have actually proactively told the clients, saying that, listen, why don't you get a vendor due diligence done? And it has happened quite a few times for us. For instance, legal, tax, financial audit, or audit as you call it, the financial diligence as you call it. All these three things should be done by the advisors of the company, so that there is a report that is generated, a risk analysis is prepared, a risk allocation happens, and then you have the company your clients have an opportunity to cover those up before they get into a term sheet stage, because then their negotiation power increases. Okay. For instance, in a tax, if they have not paid any money for TDS or whatever, the TDS is not paid for 2 months or so, and you pointed out as tax advisor this amount has not been paid, so allocate it as soon as possible and cover up this risk. That will get diluted in the documentation when it comes to, let's say, reps and warranties or indemnities, which is playing heavily in today's investors' mind. That's a separate topic altogether that we are also facing as lawyers. The investors have woken up to their rights and they have started enforcing them now. Whereas in 2003, 2002, when we were doing these, the halcyon days of PEVC investment, wherein valuations were going haywire, there was no control on the rights. They were just used to sign the documents. But today, the investors are far more active than they were in the past. So we've recommended that do a vendor diligence of tax, financial and legal, do a risk analysis, cover it up completely, go to the term sheet, have a better negotiations power, and then talk on almost on a one-to-one basis. No doubt a person who has money has got a lot of say, no doubt about that. But at least you'll be able to cover up your tracks a lot. And that has been fairly acceptable, not only in large deals and semi-large deals, but a lot of pushback comes on the angel investments or the VC stage of 4 million, 3 million, because money is an issue there. So what typically happens is all of us will share our reports on behalf of clients to the investors, counsels and advisors. They will review it, they'll ask hundreds of questions to you on various aspects of it. You answer them and the time lag of the entire transaction minimizes and your client's risk profile lowers down to the extent that the less giveaway happens in the documentation stage. That you might want to consider advising your clients going forward.
So then, coming to the clauses for the documentation of the investment agreement or share subscription or share purchase, whatever terminology we say. Like first the parties, recitals, definitions and all these. But coming to the point here, like definitions becomes a very integral part of the entire documentation, because just to give you a small example on the last deal that me and Venkat sir were working on. Like the definition actually we link all the clauses with the definition, right? So this definition, there was a clause definition called losses. This losses, when we are defining in the definition, which is getting connected with the indemnification provision, which is in the main body of the document. So what happens is, in the indemnification clause, which I'll anyways explain later. So in this indemnification clause, what we say, like if the investor incurs or suffers any loss, right? So then the promoters or the company jointly or severally will be liable to indemnify. Now there is but in the definition of loss, what we put in is losses will be direct and actual. So when I read the definition, read the indemnification clause, it becomes like incurred, suffered and direct and indirect losses. Even though I am not putting the particular word there, because there are a lot of pushbacks which comes from the investors council or from the investors. Like whether direct or whether it is indirect, I don't care. The point is that, if I have suffered a loss, you have to give me. But again, the question of enforceability comes in for indirect losses, because there are provisions in the Indian Contract Act which particularly says that indirect or consequential losses may not be enforceable as such. So then,
one more. Okay, let me just take a step back on this, ladies and gentlemen. One of the things that we need to recognize in a documentation of this nature that Apurva is speaking about is the subtlety of law. What he's talking about is extremely subtle. Okay, to sensitize you on how law runs on English. Okay, it's your intent of the mind which gets converted into language. And there has been Supreme Court judgments of on comma, a simple comma. Okay, so the subtlety of law is what is very, very important, and you need to sensitize your clients in terms of how to approach an issue. I mean, they read it as a businessman. A term sheet is a pure commercial document. But trust me, if a term sheet, I've seen three stages in my career. Term sheet which is barely one pager, half a pager. I've seen stages in 2001, 98, 99, wherein an investor, a Gujarati businessman, invested 25 lakhs then as an angel investment by merely giving a check across the table. That's one scenario that I've seen. It got matured into a better scenario in 2002, wherein there were term sheets of 1, 2, 3, 4 pages. Today we have term sheets of 6, 7, 8 pages. But I've also seen a term sheet of 36 pages, or 52 pages.
As good as an agreement.
As good as an agreement. And trust me, sir, trust me, that term sheet took 2 months to 2.5 months to finalize. 2.5 months to finalize. But when it came to documentation, it got over in 1 week.
It is easier.
It's easier. So the intent of the parties at the very stage of the first few meetings, if it can be starting to match up, if you can start them to align themselves in, you have a lot of effort that gets, minimized in terms of the number of hours that you spend on a transaction, and it just eats up your time. There was this transaction wherein the term sheet was only one pager. Okay, I will invest this much company, this is the valuation, and no clauses that Apurva is going to speak about on ROFR and all that. And when it came to us, I asked these questions to the promoter, and investor was also in a hurry, I think. We asked this question: what are your special rights that you're going to give away? This is the money of 6 million that's coming in. What are your special rights that you're giving away? What are your rights? This is an instrument. Fair enough. He had no clue. And that took close to 4.5 months to conclude in a documentation stage. For a company which is at that stage, not even a growth phase, wherein the company requires 4 to 6 million, it is really a requirement of money at that point of time. That's my understanding. I'm sure you have a better understanding of it from a financial perspective. But that took 4.5 to 5 months to conclude, and then the CPs. If the entire transaction money came in about 7 months' time. By the time the runway of money was getting, they were almost desperate. They did a bridge round in between. So the term sheet, extensivity of the term sheet is very, very important. Extremely important is my view. So if you can advise your clients to be thorough on the term sheet, both on the legal aspects, at least agree upon the fundamental issues of row 4, row 4, that will be of great help, if not 30 pages of term sheet. And to add to what he was saying is the indemnity clause. It's been my experience, ladies and gentlemen, that the indemnity clause was a very benign clause 10 years back. Very benign, sleepy clause. It was just there because it had to be there. But today, that indemnity clause has woken up big time insofar as the investors are concerned and is being enforced very, very aggressively. Because what's happening is that exits, as you would know, are few and far in between. Today, you see an exit of secondary, it's not happening. The only exit the investors in the last 1.5 to 2 years have got is IPOs, right? Mostly through IPOs, right? If you see Capacit, if you see other major IPOs, you see the HCG is one classic example when the investors exited. So you have seen a lot of exits happening through IPO in the past 2 years, but you haven't seen exits of secondary sale happening. So this is very relevant when it comes to, and why is it not happening is because the company has gone down, there's some misrepresentations, a lot of issues, and indemnity has woken up a big time these days. So the enforceability of indemnity is a lawyer's delight, and we are happy to be here. It is fantastic these days. I mean, the investors have started getting very positive about it.
So then comes the conditions precedent, which actually comes out from the diligence that is done. Then comes the standstill covenants. So the standstill covenants are more like once the investor and the promoters execute the document till the closing, how the company is to get operated or function, or in the apart from in the ordinary course of business, like more of a kind of affirmative rights only, but a little bit diluted kind of stuff. Like then comes the closing of the funds come in, shares gets issued or shares gets transferred, then the conditions are subsequent, like which I have already explained. Then comes the representations and warranties, which is very important in the sense like the reps and warranties in the document are like, there most of the times if the investor has a high negotiation power, they will put in the document saying that we are investing in this company relying on the reps and warranties of the company. So from the promoter's standpoint, just to dilute this reps and warranties is that we take resort to the disclosure letters. So what we generally do is we take the entire reps and warranties in a separate document in a table. For each reps and warranties, we make disclosures. For example, the reps and warranty says that there is no pending or outstanding litigation, claim, threatened litigation, whatever. This is the rep that is given by the company and the promoters. But it's hardly, there are very few companies, like if you see large companies, there definitely will be a litigation which is pending. If not litigation, at least threatened litigation. Now what do you mean by threatened litigation? How will I anticipate that there is a litigation that is getting threatened? So from the lawyer standpoint, we understand like if you get a notice, maybe a legal notice or a notice from the tax department, right, something of that kind. So that will be construed to be a threatened litigation. So from the reps and when the promoters of the company is giving reps and warranties, the disclosure letter actually will protect the promoters from any breach of reps and warranties or misrepresentations if we prepare a proper comprehensive disclosure letter just to dilute the reps and warranties of the company. This actually not only helps the promoters but also helps the investors also to take a reasoned call.
But what happens is there has been quite a few experiences on the other side of the fence. The reps and warranties, just to go back to reps and warranties, there are two rules that we have in reps and warranties. One, it should not be repetitive, okay, and it should not be futuristic. It should be for the present. So the company you're taking is at the present. So don't give me a future representation warranty. So we push back on that, number one. Number two is the misrepresentation aspect of which Apurva is speaking is the disclosure letter needs to be extremely comprehensive because it is saying one of the things that the promoters are actually very, very cagey about disclosing is because the valuations get hit. If there is a tax payment that needs to be done of 5 crores and an investment of 15 crores, or let's say 1 crore in an investment of 15 crores, 60 lakhs to 1 crore in investment of 15 crores, the investor will look at the disclosure letter. It doesn't come up in the diligence, let's say. doesn't come up in the diligence, it comes up in the disclosure letter when the company is proactively disclosing to the investor, it's saying that I have a show cause notice of 60 lakhs or 70 lakhs or whatever that is. And then there's an investment of 15 crores happening. So he sees a 15 crore investment as an investor, and he sees a show cause notice of about close to a crore, and he goes back to the promoter for negotiate. So promoters are very cagey about these kind of scenarios, which leaves them exposed. And we have advised clients to disclose it, but again, the commercial aspect of it is for them is very, very important at that point of time, and they've taken those risks. And massive risks. Some of them have burned their fingers big time. Some of them have made it to the finish line, and they're doing well now.
Okay, so the next point is on the indemnities, which is one of the major important clause for all the lawyers in any negotiation deals of investment agreements. So I myself have seen Venkat sir negotiating on indemnity clause in one of the deals. The particular that clause actually has been negotiated for almost 2 weeks, sir. 2 to 3 weeks. Only that clause has been negotiated for almost 2 to 3 weeks, and this indemnity clause is again like, if you are from the investor side or from the promoter side, it's actually, the current trend is like the indemnities actually gets segregated into 2 parts. One is a kind of a general indemnity, wherein whatever the losses that arises, incurred or suffered and all, that will be paid. Then comes the specific indemnities, which actually once that the disclosure letter is done, right, as I was saying that there is a litigation pending, or there is an outstanding, there is some outstandings which are supposed to be paid to some vendors, or maybe some disclosures that are there. So the specific indemnities will actually get carved out from the disclosure letter itself, and if the investor will want these lacunas, whatever are stated in the disclosure letters, to get, so that they get protected if anything comes out, otherwise comes out from those kind of lacunas or non-compliances. For example, many of the companies may not have certain licenses or maybe some environmental environmental notice or notice from tax. So if that gets fructified, or if that, from the environmental department, if anything comes like, you shut down this unit, or from tax department it comes that this becomes payable. So that protection, for that, those incidents actually will be particularly set out in those specific indemnities, and if these happens, then the promoters or the company are supposed to indemnify for the losses that the investor might suffer or incur. Now this word suffer or incur again has a different kind of connotation. Like whether, if the claim, for example, it's the amount is determined by the authorities that this is payable, you are supposed to pay. At that point of time, whether the company and the investor is supposed to, company and the promoter is supposed to pay to the investor, is that the loss? Or the amount that has been claimed has been first, the loss has been incurred, there has been an expense in the books, and then the payment has to be made. So that is like a kind of debate. It's debatable. So once it arises, then again it will be a subject matter of debate. So if you have,
so indemnity is basically a negotiation power. There is no law behind it. Okay. Even though Contract Act does cover it, there is no law behind it. Number one. Number two is you evaluate an indemnity from both perspectives, investor and the promoters. So from the investor side, obviously it needs to be as simple as possible. That I suffer a loss, I'll put you a bill, I'll get the money. But from the promoter side, you don't normally do that. What you do is, as a counsel to the advisor to the company or the promoters, you try to entangle, and our Indian system is beautiful that way, with all due respects. You try to entangle the entire indemnity claim in a process driven. You will put a bill on me, I will evaluate it, if I don't agree, I'll refer to an expert, that kind of process. We've seen an indemnity clause that we negotiate, very funny clause, which I don't understand now how I negotiate it. We don't understand our own negotiations. It's a 12-page indemnity wherein if you and I don't agree, we were arguing for the promoters, wherein if you and I don't agree for the bill of indemnity that has come through, I will first refer to an expert. That expert will give an opinion, and if I don't agree on that, me the promoter, don't agree on that expert's opinion, I'll refer it to 2 high court judges. If I still don't agree on it, we'll refer to a 3rd high court judge. And if that still doesn't happen, it goes to Supreme Court judge, retired of course, retired Supreme Court judges. So we tried to entangle it, and fortunately for us, we got it away. But it's a very, from an investor's perspective, it ought not to have been negotiated. But when I read that clause, I myself get entangled as to what we negotiated is good for it, because from a promoter's side, we always negotiate indemnity from a very ambivalent perspective, prone to interpretations. The language has to be very loose, not tight. That's what we do. But when you come to the investor's side, and that's a funny thing of law, that you can represent both sides at some point of time. It's a pretty straightforward. I've suffered indemnity, here is the bill, paid. And we face these kind of issues. So indemnity is a big thing. And the third point that I want to make and just conclude on the indemnity is basically you can negotiate. I've seen an indemnity of 2,500 crores. I've seen an indemnity of 100% the purchase consideration. I've also seen an indemnity of 120% of purchase consideration. And I've seen a clause wherein there is no indemnity at all. So the very interesting question is that we have, to be honest with you, not dealt with it too many things in indemnity not being there, but a couple of very isolated transactions I have personally come across where the indemnity was itself not there in that particular share subscription agreement or shareholders agreement. The question that arose academically, nothing happened, the company is doing well and all that, and the investors are happy, in fact they have exited also. The question that arose is that since an indemnity has not been negotiated, will it tantamount to that if there is a loss to the investor's value to the investor, will he be able to claim the issue that's risen? I don't know the answer as yet. I think no, but it's left to the lawyers and the other brilliant lawyers that can come up with different interpretations. So indemnity is a big thing these days.
One question here.
Yeah, please go ahead. In fact, I was about to say, please.
When there is a disclosure, for example, there is a licensing process, so they are disclosed. And factoring all these, the investment happened. Then the license due to some governmental reasons, it has not happened. In such a case, how promoter is responsible for the loss to the investor?
No, so that is normally in condition precedent, sir. To answer your question, if a license has been applied for, not obtained by the promoter because the government has not given an approval, that is beyond its his control. That is normally a CP, not an indemnity scenario. And if it's been negotiated that way, it will be very bad. In fact, because conditional sale, CPs are nothing but conditional sale in terms of Sale of Goods Act. I'm boring you with law, but just bear with me for a moment. When I put some conditions that you satisfy all these conditions, promoter, then I'll invest. It's a conditional sale. You satisfy it, then I'll invest. If you don't satisfy it, I cannot invest. But indemnity being a contractual issue, it's been negotiated on behalf of the investor that if you don't satisfy these conditions precedent, I have suffered a loss, I think it would be payable.
No, conditions precedent does not happen. The investment itself will not happen. No?
Correct, sir. You're right, absolutely right. But the investors council would come and argue, my client has actually put forth a diligence cost, advisor's cost, travel cost, and etc. cost. And that is now liable to be reimbursed by the promoter because he could not get the government approval. That is a negotiable clause, which from a promoter's council's perspective, we should not even accept.
In the indemnity thing, when even after declaring all the conditions, after that, if the investor incurs loss, in spite of complying with all the conditions, generally where we see these indemnity clauses are where it is all futuristic. It's basically if you incur any loss, this is what will be borne by me, this is what will be made good by the promoter. But how will it be executed? How will it be quantified saying that, okay, this is because of that?
Okay. Two parts to it, sir. One is indemnity is not futuristic. Indemnity is on basically the reps and warranties breach. Reps and warranties is taken as on a particular date. Let's say there is a execution date today. That is one set of reps. Then there is a closing. There is a second set of reps. Same set of reps getting repeated basically. So there are 2 dates. Indemnity is linked to these 2 dates. It is not as if after the investment has happened and something occurs on the basis of a future event, indemnity is not payable. But again, I must caveat that it's pure a negotiation issue. It's purely a negotiation issue. We've never negotiated a document wherein we say futuristic indemnity has to be given on a future event. We've never done that. Having said that, recently we were forced to accept that contention from the big investor that we were dealing with. And no, in that there was this clause which says that they have 54 factories or something, 54 companies and some lot of factories. And they said that if one of the factories shuts down because of government intervention or any other reason, because of the fault of the company and the promoter, indemnity is then payable. So it's a futuristic event that we have given. It's a pure negotiation issue, it can be done. But normally we should not agree to it. Yes, sir.
You say for the reps and warranties it will not be futuristic. Now say, can it be a condition existing today, but like say for example a tax scenario, I mean your assessment happens say 2 years later. But strictly speaking, the company has disclosed everything, there has been a diligence, you have gone through the tax diligence and all that, and everybody is fine with the view as on today. But say tomorrow assessment order happens and you're supposed to pay something. So do you still go ahead and negotiate something like that which is futuristic but dependent upon something today which the company has disclosed it, the investor is also aware?
Normally, to answer your question directly, normally an indemnity would have to be negotiated for that. Okay, and indemnity is always in favor of the investor because because when the promoter is in control of the company and this assessment happens in 4, 5, 7 years, right? So if today I am the promoter and I have filed my tax returns, the assessment happens after the investment 2 years, 3 years later, and there is some tax that is payable on account of my misrepresentation. I emphasize, on account of my misrepresentation, indemnity would be payable by me. But understand one thing, it's a purely contractual issue. There is no law in it. It is, I can also say, you and I can also agree that I as a promoter will also be liable for an indemnity in the particular example that we are taking with respect to the tax that has to be paid by the company. I as a promoter personally liable. I can also negotiate that way. It's a pure negotiation issue. But normally in 9.99, 9.5 out of 10 cases, you will find a common indemnity going back to the reps and warranties.
Just to add on this indemnity point, if it is from the promoter's side, just to have a little bit of protection rather than having an open-ended indemnity, you can particularly take a de minimis clause or some kind of threshold. Like for example, it's like a cap, or maybe so indemnity may not be payable if the losses incurred or suffered is 5 crores. So anything above 5 crores, okay, I will indemnify, and you can put a cap also saying that 25 crores or maybe 50 crores, depends on the investor and the investment that he puts in, right? Typically the investors always will look in for the maximum amount of investments that they are putting in. Generally they look at that, but again it's as Venkat sir was saying, like it's more of a negotiation skill, how you interact and negotiate. It's pure negotiations.
Excuse me, if the proper disclosure has been made on a proper demand and steps taken also been disclosed,
Right.
can it be probably ensured in the indemnity clause saying that in this particular matter, whatever happens, indemnity will not be.
So that is what I was earlier saying. The indemnity gets split into two parts.
No, the investor has invested with a proper knowledge and the steps they appeal or whatever they say.
Right.
So in this particular case, if it happens the other way, also indemnity will not be. Is it possible to negotiate?
Yeah, I mean, sir, that's the point I was saying, that indemnity gets split into two parts. One is general, one is specific. Your specific indemnities actually are taken from the disclosures.
Yeah.
Right? So in your disclosure, for example, you have stated like there is a litigation bill.
There is a given, your lawyers,
No, I
there is a
think
given saying that the diligence has taken into account these disputes and the disclosure made the steps which is from our promoter's side, which is getting to protect. And the investment has happened after that. And the social class subject to disclosures made or something,
Sir, you can, that is what we are saying, it's pure negotiation, how you negotiate. If the investor is okay with putting that clause, definitely.
no, I think
that will intervene. How do you advise the promoter, sir?
I see.
To ensure.
Let me see if I can understand this better. What happens is, in a scenario that we're talking about wherein there has been a disclosure, whether an indemnity, the question I believe you are asking is whether an indemnity still can be, whether the investor can still be indemnified. As Apurva says, it's a pure negotiation issue.
No,
in large,
I'm from the advisor side.
sir,
Can this be insured to the promoters that if you put this clause, then you are probably better off? I mean, like that.
Sir, my take
What is
on
that?
this, sorry,
no, go ahead, please go ahead. More than
my
happy.
take on this, if you put these clauses,
You are
the
valuation.
price will come down.
Yeah, natural.
They will factor that in the valuation.
Once you,
valuation.
once you disclose, it happens. I mean, after that, what I'm saying, after disclosure, when the price also gets, altered, not because if we don't disclose in indemnity, it happens once you disclose. That's my opinion. See,
I've seen
once you
indemnity-
disclose and take a price on that, what is that, what you should do? Subsequently, you also don't end up paying much more.
I'd like to understand that. Let's take it off, and I'm not able to understand the question. I'm sorry about it.
I think what he's basically referring to is once you have a term sheet and you call out what are the issues, specific indemnities, you can get around this by putting thresholds on each indemnity.
Yeah, definitely.
That's right.
So that will automatically, because he's already taken a hit on the valuation. Therefore, the indemnities need to be
It
reviewed.
matters.
Yes.
For example, tax demand.
And that's one of the reasons why the disclosure letter is pushed back by the promoters. They say that the moment you start disclosing tax, show cause notice of 2 crore, 1 crore, they say valuation will get hit, don't disclose it.
It gets affected already.
It gets affected. So this ecosystem is still evolving, sir, as we understand in a very naive way. It's still evolving. Promoters are still pushing back, but the investors are getting far more active in terms of enforcement of indemnity through valuation, as you rightly pointed out, or to enforcement. Classic example is Reliance EDAC company putting an indemnity of 7,200 crores, 5,200 crores on Pipavav defense. Okay, they put an indemnity for misrepresentation. That's a classic one. Okay, there are two, but not many examples in the court of law on enforcement of indemnity in the court of law. A lot of examples in terms of adjustment of valuations. But having said that, sir, there is one thing that is slightly legal. Is a Supreme Court judgment which is about Nirma Industries. We've argued that when we have disclosed everything in the diligence, the promoter has disclosed everything in the diligence, and whether adjustment happens or not on valuation, yet the investor has taken a call to invest in the company or take over the company through an M&A route. The investor is now informed. The report, the judgment clearly says that the investor cannot take an indemnity then, because he's invested on the basis of knowledge. So that also we try to push through, but it's a very open area. It's a very open area, pure negotiations.
In the same case wherein once a term sheet is made and after that one disclosure has been made and the price has been altered, whether the negotiation amount has been altered. Say suppose I had a show cause notice of say 2 crore rupees and based on that my valuation has come down. But say in future that show cause notice, I win the case and that is in the company's favor. So will that money go back to the promoter?
Yeah, pure negotiation issue.
No,
Yeah.
will it go back to the promoter?
Yeah.
Okay.
It can be structured as hard cash.
Okay.
In fact, it's a very good question that you asked. We faced this recently, same thing, but of course the values were at least 100 times bigger. Wherein we said that we were representing the promoter. We said that if the money comes back to the company, it belongs to us. I've been out of pocket. So you pay me, the investor. We told the investor, the foreign investor, that you have to pay me because I've already taken a hit on the value. So he said that he cannot pay through because of RBI regulations around that. He'll make the payment through the company, which he now owns about 60 or 70%. So that can be happen. It can also happen that you may waive all the clause. It's a pure negotiation yet again.
No, I have two questions again in that. Say, the negotiation would happen in terms of raising the equity or bringing down the...
It can, okay, that's the second part of the answer that I wanted to give you. It can happen in cash.
Okay.
It can happen in equity as well.
Okay.
It can happen in some kind of extra grant that you through a sweat equity that needs to be structured. But consideration can be anything. You're right.
I think together with that, I think referring to that claim, right? So I mean, even I think that was structured a little bit. The amount is also segregated. Certain amount has been segregated as a service fee as well.
Correct.
So that considering that they are foreign investors, so they will not be able to follow up with the government, right? The refund claims, whatever that is lying right now. So this Indian promoters will give assistance to the company as well as the foreign investors for getting that amount. For that, for the easy flow, like so that the money, considering if it is coming from abroad, it's very difficult from the RBI or the FEMA angle. So there will be a service fee that will be paid. Certain amount of that claim only, it's actually structured in a different way. So that a certain amount of 35 crores or maybe 80 crores will be paid as service fee to the existing promoters.
And that's where the tax component is very, very high. So the consideration that you're talking about, sir, is that it can be in cash, it can be in shares, it can be in anything, right? So one of the methodologies that they have adopted is we create a service contract as if we are providing service to you and take the money out.
Okay.
But that's again a tax issue, pure tax issue. So legally we can do anything that we want, but the influence of tax and the advisors out here is very, very high and sensitive. Because we are talking, I mean, right now we will be talking about $1 million or $2 million. But in deals like the 300, there is a deal that we are doing, we've done it, it's a 250 crore service contract. And tax component, I don't know, you will have to evaluate it, let us know. And it's a heavy tax component. So the tax aspect of it plays a huge role in structuring these kind of considerations to be taken.
So in these negotiations of the clauses, various clauses,
Sir.
whether you will advise the clients or how you will only leave it to them for discussion?
No, sir, both ways. It's subject to the client's comfort. More often than not, majority of the cases, if you're a client, we discuss the document with you first, understand the entire thought process of you have, marry the legal with it, then go and negotiate the document on behalf of the client.
Is there any situation where you are acting both on behalf of the promoter as well as
Yeah, but we take no objections from both sides.
In that case, what will be your
That's a fine line. That's a fine line. We get caught, yes. In fact, we are doing one. It's a small round. I think it's 2 crores or so angel funding. Obviously, no counsels, advisors and all that promoter cannot afford. And the investor also says he understands that. So he's given us both of them have given a no objection to represent both sides. Now we are stuck about the reps and warranties and I don't know what to say.
Do you do it with the same partner or different partners?
No, we don't do. See, as a firm, we have a policy that we will not represent. He will not represent investor in a same transaction as representing the company. That's a firm policy that we have. But we can represent both sides provided we have emails to the effect that we have no objection emails from both sides.
I feel that you better both people appoint same advocates.
No, sir. Advocates committee is very.
So it will be easier, no? Otherwise, the two advocates fight always.
Yes,
and it will be endless.
But that's in our genes, no, that's the only way we can do it. We improve our value by the noise that we make in the negotiations.
But at that point of time, it really becomes difficult for a lawyer to take a call.
That's correct.
No, it's been very good on an anecdotal level. I've seen three instances come to mind straight away. Wherein a senior partner of a law firm comes in. It's happened to one of my other partners. But anecdotal level, just to keep the atmosphere light because we're heading to lunch. So this guy comes in and this gentleman comes in and tells my other partner from Delhi, saying that he starts off, I don't want to do this deal, I'm going to advise my client not to do this deal, these terms and conditions. He started practically shouting at the top of his voice in a room of about 20 people. So this partner coolly hears him off for 5 minutes, that harangue that keeps going on and on. We lawyers are lovely with words, okay? I can keep going on to the next floor if you want me to. But, so this guy, my colleague partner says, listen, the temperature is too high, why don't you lower your voice and cool it down? That's one thing that I've seen. Second thing I've seen is very nasty, when the files are thrown at the other side. That also happens. The third thing which is, has been happening with us more is a collaborative approach. In one of the deals that we did with a tier 1 firm, the two partners got along famously and says, and he was from North Delhi, and I was also, I grew up in North for a while, so I know Hindi pretty well. So we would get stuck in negotiations, and then he would lunchtime would go, kya karna hai isko? No, that kind of conversation we used to have. So I would tell him before, boss, in anecdotal ways only, we said, if I agree to this clause, my fee will be reduced by a percentage. If you agree to that, so it is a very collaborative approach that we had. Unfortunately, the transaction is taking a long time to close. It's taken 2 years now. It's an 800 crore transaction. But that collaborative approach is now the flavor of the season. amongst the lawyers, which is we matured.
Just adding to what Venkat said on that particular deal, the indemnity clause is about 10 to 12 pages, and that took actually some 3 weeks for finalization. So the indemnity clause got so much convoluted, and all the other counsel got, probably may not have missed the, he might have missed the line. It was reading in such a way that actually the indemnity clause doesn't exist. So that got caught on the date of signing of the document and around 12:30 at night. So then there was a huge fight, both legal counsels left that we are not going, okay, we are not giving and all. Then again after 2 days, I think it got finally got done. So I mean, we said like, okay, it's fair, like they should have the indemnity clause. So.
No, but I've seen that's how the lawyer, but promoters are equally culpable. I've seen a transaction in Delhi wherein Singapore investors have come in, all of us, advisors from both sides, investors have come in, counsels from both sides, and promoters not coming in. The document is printed, stamped papers, and the secretary is calling the promoter, sir, please come and sign it. He just did not appear. I can't name the client. Singapore people came from the Singapore, they travelled for 2 days, they were staying in Leela Hotel or something. And the promoter just never appeared for 3 days flat, which means he didn't want to do a transaction. I've seen another one, which is a client of ours right now in Hyderabad. Deal got signed, money got paid to the promoter, and the promoter says, I don't want to do the deal, I don't want to transfer my shares. He returns the money. So, these funny things keep happening which keeps us alive. So, I must tell you that lawyers are not the only ones who are villains. Promoters are equally on the same space.
So coming to the other points, I'll just quickly wrap it up. Like governing law and dispute resolution clause. This is like, governing law generally, for all Indian deals, we put governing law in India only, we have to put it, there is no other way out. For dispute resolution clause, generally what happens is, both the parties, we intend, if you are representing the promoter side, we intend to keep the local jurisdiction. But what happens is, from the investor side, they always ask for a neutral jurisdiction. For example, if we are from Bangalore, we say like Bangalore or maybe Hyderabad or Delhi. But if it is a foreign investor, he will ask for maybe Singapore or something, because that's one of the preferred kind of jurisdiction where by SIAC rules it will be governed. So that is one. Then coming to the non-compete and non-solicitation clause, those are like all general clauses, like most of the miscellaneous confidentiality, miscellaneous clauses and all. Then coming to the right of first offer and right of first refusal, I think in the first presentation it was already explained. I'll just briefly touch it upon. Right now I think the most preferred one is right of first offer, which the investors are actually looking for rather than go for.
Sorry, Apurva. So you will see a classic case of two lawyers fighting, because I am saying ROFR is a lesser preferred clause today as opposed to ROFO, and he says ROFR is a lesser, better clause than ROFO. So you can see the example of two lawyers already fighting in live cases.
Okay, so then coming to the drag along and the tag along rights, I think the earlier presentation they said about the drag, but somehow the tag along rights have been missed out. So tag along is nothing but, for example, if I am an investor, I am investing in your company, I am actually investing in the company looking at the promoter as well, not only on the numbers, not only on the company's performance, I am also looking at the promoter. So for example, like basically from a startup point of view, startup actually is nothing but the founders who actually are doing it. So if the founders are leaving the organization, then obviously, for the investors' point of view, it's really difficult. So if the promoters are willing to or transferring their shares at any point of time, then my shares as an investor should be also tagged along, and the first tranche, the first sale should be like my shares as an investor shares should be first sold off. And the valuations around that probably will be discussed at a later point of time. But these are the tag along rights. Now anti-dilution, liquidation preference has been dealt with, but liquidation preference and IRR also, what Sir has rightly said, like RBI has actually put a very restriction on the optionality clause, which has an assured exit. So IRR as on date is, from a foreign investor point point of view is not enforceable. Then comes the reserve matter rights.
I just want to talk about a bit of a drag along, special rights. These are all negotiated rights, as you all know, obviously. I will not touch upon mostly. But drag can be negotiated, and drag is normally negotiated by us for 100% sale. We've seen clauses wherein drag gets initiated at 26% itself, which means if there's an investor who's trying to purchase the company out at 26, the entire 100% sale can also happen. So we need to be very, very sensitive about the drag right. Very sensitive, because in my experience, I have not seen, of course, Devendra was suggesting that there has been a drag right in Mr. Raman's case, but I have not seen a drag right in my experience, very limited experience. But it's a very dangerous clause, especially for bigger transactions. Because, and the other thing, all these special rights, tag, drag, strategic sale, private sale, liquidation preference starts from day one. Okay. Now, in a recent transaction, even the buyback was from day one, the exit rights basically. So we have to negotiate saying how can you actually invest today and ask for buyback tomorrow. So defer it for 3 years. So it's pure negotiation issue, but the most dangerous of all is a drag right, which is obviously somehow, the interplay between drag, tag is also very important. Because in a tag scenario, I could cross that barrier which attracts drag. So you need to be very, very sensitive to those clauses. And there's a lot of subtleties in it, which I will not bore you with. But what I'm trying to say in simple terms is, the interplay between these exit rights is so huge in comparison to a drag. Because if you put a higher threshold for drag, your client will be protected, which is a promoter. But if you put a lower threshold for drag, and the tag takes you to the lower threshold, drag kicks in. And if the company is doing well, trust me, the right of the investor to drag is activated and possibly implemented also.
What's the difference between drag and tag?
See, for drag, it is like, see, most of these are all actually exit rates. Okay, so the point is, in case of drag is like, if I as an investor wants to sell my part of equity or securities, whatever I'm holding, and I found a third party who is actually willing to buy my shares. Now I am holding 20% maybe as an investor. So when I approached the third party, he said I am willing to buy so long as I get more than 25%, assume, right, or maybe 51%. But I am only 20%. Right? So at that point of time, I will drag the balance shares from the promoters and then sell it off to the third party. So this is drag.
Forcible sale. Basically.
Yeah, it's a kind of forced sale, right? And tag is, for example, the promoter is exit, and I am not willing to stay in this company without the promoter being in the company, because the face of the company is the promoter. Without the founder or the promoter leaving, I am sure that the revenue profitability of the company will be in an adverse situation. So I will tag my shares at that together with the shares that the promoter is willing to sell. So once the promoter is selling, my shares of 20% will first go out, and then his shares will go out.
At the same value, it's a concurrent transaction, not a sequential transaction. The same value goes out.
Sir, is it mandatory?
No, nothing is mandatory.
No, once I put a tag clause.
Yeah.
So
okay. Once you put a tag clause, it's your option. Normally, it's your option.
The promoter might not be a risk taker, so he might want to exit early. So and if the investor does not want to exit, still he will have to exit.
Yeah. So if the councils are told about this commercial mind of the promoter, the intent, then it can be negotiated to give the promoter the right of tag at his option.
No. If already the tag rights is already there, say in the document, okay, and if the investor does not want to execute that right.
Okay, so is the option of the investor.
Okay, is it there? Is what I'm asking.
No. So okay.
Is there an option?
So basically, the investor gets a third party right, the third party sale offer.
Okay.
Let's say third party offers him I want to purchase the shares. Since there is a tag for the promoter, investor goes back to the promoter and says, listen, I got an offer. Would you want to come along with me to sell the shares? Okay. It's the promoter's call. It's a negotiation issue. It's a promoter's call. It's an option of the promoter. Otherwise, if it's a forceful thing, it becomes a drag. So there are two aspects of it. When it becomes a forceful thing, the investor goes back to the promoter and says, you have to come along with me. It's a drag. It's a forceful scenario. Or in a tax scenario, he goes to the investor, he goes to the promoter and says, why don't you come along with me at your option at this price? It's a call of the promoter then. If he wants to encash, he can. That has happened. That has happened in my experience.
So generally these rights are executed only in the events of default itself, generally.
But the famous exits of late has been IPO. The IPO market picking up now, IPO has come down. The famous has been the IPO exits mostly, and the secondary sales.
Okay, just to add one thing on this exit rights also, there is a buyback that we generally put in together with IPO, drag and all. Buyback also is one of the exit rights of the investors. Now, buyback obviously there are thresholds like 25% and all these stuffs are there. So if at that point of time the company may not have money also at that point of time to do the buyback, it depends. So in that case, another clause that we put in is if the company is not able to do the buyback, the promoters are supposed to do the secondary purchase and pay the investor. So I think from a documentation point, this is what is it like? And there are stamp duty aspects also, like for share purchase agreement in Hyderabad you pay like around 1200, 1500, but in Bangalore it's a different scenario. You pay 0.1% of the consideration of the value. Then so stamp duty also plays a very major role. Like for transfer of shares also you pay 0.25% on the share transfer deed and all this stuff.
Very funny because if you execute a transaction in Bombay, stamp duty apparently is very high there. So you normally don't. So Bombay parties come out of Bombay, execute it in Delhi or let's say Hyderabad, and the emails never go because as per Stamp Act, an instrument if it crosses the border through an email also is exigible to the stamp duty. So two Bombay parties will go to Delhi, execute and keep the documents there. It never comes to Bombay, even by email. So there's a lot of inconsistencies in the laws itself, so to speak. I think, ladies and gentlemen, I think I'm being prompted by Shivram. I can go on and on, we can go on. Just a last question.
One small question I had about English language. We spoke about affirmative rights. So one part is legal, the operational part. Is there any interpretation of the word strategic there? I'll ask you the context. You will list out of things that the board cannot do. Either preceded on top saying that shall not be doing the following without consent, then using this word, signaling strategic intent either on the top of a list of clauses or at the last clause bottom where it says strategic clause up to and including that word.
Why don't we take this offline because Shivram is, I think his stomach is growling. So. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. It's been
Thank you so much.
Friends, we were supposed to conclude this session at 1 o'clock. Now it is 1:30. Still we wanted to extend this session because that kind of questions are there. And important thing is this kind of an agreement will take more than 1 month if you do dedicated. Because I was working with Venkat, it took more than 1 month to 45 days to close one single agreement. So that is the kind of documentation. I think we need to have one full day session to study what are the repercussions and importance and how should we structure and work these kind of documents and all. But as an institute, we thought we will have at least 2 day sessions to cover up end to end. That being the case, this got only limited time slot. Maybe in due course we would like to have a bigger session for the documentation. Job well done, Venkat and Apurva. Please give them a big round of applause. Now I request CA Kiran Kumar to come forward and present a memento to both the eminent speakers here. Sri Venkat Satyanarayana and also Apurva. Friends, next question which always comes to any chartered accountant's mind is if these are the kind of structures, things, what is the impact on the tax part of it, right? How do we deal with these kind of things, right? So to touch upon this subject, we have one another eminent personality who is none other than Santosh Maheshwari. He is already here. Let us break for lunch and come back to listen to him, okay? Thank you.